Estamos viviendo nuestra cuarta revolución científica. La primera fue la revolución copernicana en el siglo XVI. 3 siglos más tarde apareció la revolución darwiniana y en el siglo XX la revolución freudiana. Ahora llega la cuarta, la revolución digital, que nos mueve del centro del mundo de la información a un nuevo sistema que crece diariamente con herramientas como Internet y la inteligencia artificial. Pero, ¿quién regula esta nueva revolución? ¿Cuál es el rol de los estados y de las empresas? ¿Hay que poner límites a la velocidad con que avanzan estas nuevas tecnologías? Para hablar de estos temas, hoy en Talking Tech, Diego Fernández Slezak charla con Luciano Floridi, filósofo de la información de la Universidad de Oxford.
Welcome, Luciano. Thank you very much for accepting for this interview. I hope that we have a very nice conversation about ethics and philosophy, and I really appreciate that having you here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So let me start with something about your life. So how would you introduce yourself?
So by the time you get a bit older and some white hair, the few hairs that are still there.
Not my
Of course,
case.
no, you're okay. So what happens is that, of course, you go through a career, and if you are a bit successful, you get to do this and that and more. So lots of titles accumulate. But the truth is that you always remain that particular person. And in my case, what I like to think of myself is that I'm really someone who likes to think. So I'm sort of a serial thinker, so to speak, as opposed to a serial killer.
It's interesting. You get paid for thinking.
I get paid to think. And sometimes I get paid to think purely theoretically, like really blue sky. That's the beauty of being in a university like Oxford. Some of the times I'm paid to think more pragmatically by some companies who want to have a solution of some problems, or at least some guidelines, especially in this line of work. Now, the digital attracts quite a lot of interest. And sometimes I'm actually not paid, but made to work anyway by the government.
So you started studying philosophy. You worked in the philosophy department at Oxford, and then
Yes.
you were in the computer science department also. How was this transition from the philosophy world to the computer science world? And
Yes, so what happened is that I was always interested in computer science, but I grew up in Italy, and I studied at La Sapienza in Rome, and the Italian system didn't allow any real mix of disciplines. You could either do philosophy or computer science or mathematics or economics, which were my 4 passions. And I realized when I was a young student that the only way to move around, have a sort of license to put your nose in other people's business was to be a philosopher. Because mathematicians can always accept that you're a philosopher, you want to know about mathematics, or a computer scientist, or an economics person. The truth is not the other way around. When someone from computer science comes to the philosophy department, they say, oh, who are you, what do you want? So I decided to do philosophy because I wanted to be able to move across subjects. Then, by the time I finished my degrees and I was in Oxford as a postdoctoral researcher, then I had a wonderful opportunity that Oxford offered, 4 years of funding to do any research you wanted, no question asked. So I won this wonderful position, which is called Junior Research Fellowship. And this was absolutely a lottery ticket. Because then I could really pursue, finally, my real passion. I said, okay, well, I'm allowed to, for 4 years, to do whatever I want with my life, academically speaking. And that's how I got into computer science, how I became involved more intensely with the impact of information technology, and the rest bring us to this interview.
it looks like the number 4 is very present in your life. You told 4 passions, 4 years of free academic thinking, and you also have the 4th innovation or revolution.
Yeah. I don't know why. Yes, it seems like the 4 elements, the 4 evangelists. There's always something special about 4, I guess. So that's the last book I published, which I don't think has been translated into Spanish, as far as I know. It's been translated in so many different strange languages, including Latvian, which is not definitely a big market.
Okay.
Spanish
is larger than...
It will be immense. So I think it's Oxford University Press having
Okay.
different kind of relationships. So I don't get into those kind of details. But the point is that that's the book that I was invited to write, and I'm very grateful to the press, the Oxford University Press, for that invitation, because I was pursuing much more theoretical, purely academic work. And they asked me, oh, could you please translate some of the academic work in something a little bit more accessible for the sort of educated public, so to speak. It's what people call trade books. And I thought, well, this is, of course, it's going to be easy. It wasn't. It's one of the most difficult books for me to write, because of course you have to be clear, simple, understandable, relevant. And as an academic, it's not always easy to speak normally and clearly about your topics. But it has been a great experience, and I think I will do more in that direction.
And you work in ethics. And if you go to the dictionary definition of ethics, you see something like the good and the bad things about morality or human behavior. So it looks like a very simple definition, but involves extremely complex concepts. So how would you define ethics more easily to understand?
Yes. So I grew up as a logician in the long time ago. And that was the way of talking to computer science. So I know philosophy of science, logic, epistemology, that side of philosophy that talks to the sciences more regularly, more friendly. But later on, especially after I went to Oxford, once I started working within the Oxford system, I became increasingly interested in the impact of digital technologies. And both socially, individually, values. And so slowly, as I grew older, I became increasingly interested in ethics. A long time ago, it looks like a different age, like 20, 30 years ago, we used to have small gatherings, just a few people, talking about what we called at the time computer ethics. Then it became information ethics. Then it became data ethics. And today we talk about digital ethics. But the issues are essentially the same. What difference does it make to have all this extraordinary technology around us to what it means to be a good agent, someone who does the right thing, what it means to build a good society, a society that cares for the right kind of values, and what it means to have, for example, responsibility for your actions. Now, these are just three simple examples. Who should I be? What society we should build? And what responsibilities we should allocate in a society that immediately are connected to the digital technologies. Now, in that sense, I think ethics has an enormous contribution to make to send the world in the right direction. I have the impression that we are really at the special stage in our history where we are laying the foundations of the information societies, because they are many and diverse. But they will share some similarities. They will be grounded on digital technologies, will be dependent on digital technologies, they will be shaped by digital technologies. So the Argentinian and the British, the Italian and the French need to take into account the values that we are pursuing and implementing. And therefore, a digital ethics, as we like to call it today, is essential. It's one of those ingredients for the future that we need to take into account. I hope politics will pay attention. It did pay attention a lot during this visit in Argentina. It's the right way forward.
If I had to make a stereotype philosopher, I would say somebody walking in the gardens, looking to the sky and thinking. But can you tell me something about how you talk with other people? So you said something in the beginning of the interview that philosophy is intrinsically interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. And the stereotype image of philosopher, it's somebody just walking along watching the sky, but that's not interdiscipline. So how is that you typically interact with people from other disciplines to make advanced ethics or philosophy or what you're studying?
Well, knowledge of other disciplines and dialogue with other disciplines is essential because of the constraints that we discussed before. Say, for example, in the work that I do in sort of philosophy of information, digital ethics, you need to do a lot of work in terms of what is the law, for example, there, or what is feasible in terms of actual computer science, again there, or economically, no, this is the model we use in this company, does it make sense? So all these pieces, they start shaping a little bit your space within which then you have to find a solution for the problem. The philosopher walking around or head in the sky and normally speaking a language that nobody understands, it's a bit of a fault of philosophy itself. I mean, philosophy likes to present itself as a discipline that is very abstract, a bit like mathematics, very useless, a bit like many other disciplines, and it's all speculations. The truth is that if you look at the great philosophers that have preceded us, say Plato, Plato went twice to Sicily to make sure that, well, unsuccessfully, that the Titan of Syracuse could fix his government. And we need to remember that the trip from Athens to Sicily was basically going to the moon these days. Yeah. I mean, it was a massive, massive risk. Aristotle taught Alexander. I mean, basically, it would be like saying, someone like saying, the teacher of Obama, just to use a different kind of president, was a philosopher and influential in terms of kind of politics and so on. You fast forward, of course, the theologians in the Middle Ages, etc. But Descartes, for example, a great mathematician, an engineer by training, who interacted with his world regularly, who actually died because he went to teach Christina in Sweden. So, bad idea. John Locke, someone trained in medicine. Hobbes, a theoretical guy who gave us one of the greatest sort of framework, politically speaking. Hume, an historian. You keep going, and essentially, philosophy, good philosophy, has always spoken with the world as the world was developing. It's not introspective, it's not about itself, it's about the world, human life, our problems. 2, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, has always tried to understand as much as possible of what's going on. If there is knowledge to be grasped, things to learn, philosophy works within those limits. It doesn't work against logic and mathematics, or it doesn't work against evidence, science. It's an ally of these things. It just thinks more deeply about problems that are the open problems that we spoke about before. And inevitably, someone has to be an expert in this conceptual design over there. But I would like to see philosophy more perceived as a very relevant and useful discipline in our life than the speculative philosopher who doesn't know what day it is and bumps into trees.
It's interesting that you say this because you do philosophy exactly in the information revolution. So you specialize in infoethics or digital ethics, as you mentioned, it's nowadays. And the artificial intelligence world is having a lot of discussions about ethics. And actually you have people that say that we should stop a little bit the development of artificial intelligence until we get some regulations or philosophy about the development of artificial intelligence. And on the other side, you have the people that says artificial intelligence is doing a lot of good in the society. We should keep going on this unbelievable rapid development. So what's your opinion about this war between those who want to stop it and the ones that are forcing them?
AI is developing very fast now. It's coming out of a long time where there wasn't much to talk about, the so-called winter of AI. And now it's taken over because of a variety of reasons in terms of new technologies, new powerful computing, massive amount of data, and also a switch from old AI to networks. deep learning, so to speak, machine learning, etc. So all these factors have made AI a pressing issue. Now, there are some people who think that we're going too fast. I'm not quite sure. I think that the question is not how fast we're going, but in which direction we're moving. As usual, with any trip, to use this analogy, now, if you like where you're going, you want to go there as quickly as possible. The trouble is that we don't really know where we're going, and therefore, some people want to be more cautious, some people want to slow down. Now, there's one thing that should be a little bit reassuring, is that overall, there are technologies that are intrinsically quite good, and some technologies that are intrinsically quite bad. Now, if you develop like a grenade, yeah, maybe there's a way of using it properly, but honestly, it's to kill people. AI is on the good side. I mean, AI is to take away from us tasks that we don't want to perform, difficulties that we wouldn't quite know how to do it, impossible tasks that would take legions of individuals and millions of hours to just even come up with a solution in a time that we don't have. So multiply that for a variety of issues that we can deal with, and on the whole, AI is a force for goodness. Having said that, of course, it can be misplaced, it can be disruptive. There's the job market that is going to be hugely affected. So more ethical thinking, more political insight, very welcome. But slowing it down, cutting it down, taxing robots, for example, has been suggested recently. I think those are bad ways of thinking ahead. It's almost like not having the courage of our decisions. We have undertaken a good step forward, is getting there that we want to do properly. Just having a bit of extra strategy in terms of exactly what society we want to build, that is the issue. The technology will follow. I mean, in fact, if we like it, we will go there even quickly.
It's interesting that you mentioned this direction stuff instead of velocity or speed of development of AI. And something interesting about this is that most of the information is controlled and owned by big companies, maybe the 5 or 6 biggest companies in computer science that do artificial intelligence. And I know that you do some advisement in ethics in Google. So how is companies tackling this problem about politics or the direction of AI trying to be for good and not for bad, while they are wanting to gain more money, basically? So how do you measure this conflict of interest?
I think this is one of the key questions we have in our society. The people in control of our, say, lives in the information society in which we live are essentially business people. Yeah. That doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, but it means that it's a limitation in what we can and should do. We need to remember that the business in questions, they don't want to be in control. They're not there to do politics, they're there to make a profit. Yeah. They step in when politics is not doing its job. So there's a co-responsibility here, which we need to remember. Companies might have too much power, but someone there allowed those companies to get their power. So whose fault is it? Those who actually gained the space, or those who left the space empty for someone to step in? And I think that politics is at fault these days because it should do much more and way better than it's doing at the moment. It's almost lacking courage to provide direction. There seems to be almost a lack of courage on the political side to step in and provide some directions, which is exactly what policymaking should be doing. So I would like to be optimistic on this point. I would like to think that politics can step up and provide some socially valuable, preferable directions to the development of business. Business might actually retreat and do what business does best. In other words, increase wealth, provide profits, provide jobs, and get the direction in the hands of those who are actually there to govern, as opposed to simply manage reality. Now, if we could go in that direction, then we would see a socio-political construction of the values that we are in question, and more, for example, in Europe, in terms of the European Commission or the European Union, doing in terms of a framework of the kind of things we want to see, for example, in the artificial intelligence sector. This is not happening at the moment, so I'm presenting a bit of a wishful thinking kind of list. At the moment, what is happening is that the sector is trying to self-regulate itself through the partnership on AI. consists of 7 companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, IBM, Microsoft, Google, and DeepMind. And they are trying to provide themselves with some rules because they have understood that no one else is doing it. Now, should we give them a hand to move in the direction? Shouldn't sort of society and politics step up and actually say, look, this is our task? I believe so, and I think that is the challenge for politics in our century.
Yeah, I think that giving this responsibility to politics also is maybe too optimistic. You need to make control of these companies, but the big power of this company is information. And to make control of this company, you need this information, but you cannot take this information because that is what they use to make profit and wealth. It's not like in the old industry that you say, oh, this company builds a car, and you control maybe the taxes or whatever. Here, you would need the information that makes their wealth in order to be able to control them. So how do you imagine that politics could enter into the AI world without having the information?
This is true, and that's why we shouldn't try to adopt 20th century solutions for the 21st.
Exactly.
The world has changed. So let me suggest a couple of things here. One, it's also true that the state, the government, is a huge owner of information.
Yeah,
so remember that all the information that we give to the government, from education to taxes, from the environment to security, it's a huge repertoire and deposit of information that should be used more intelligently, socially. So the government should do its part. 2, control, it comes with legislation, and nothing is more powerful than a piece of law that says you cannot do this, otherwise here's the fine. Now look at what's happening with Facebook and Google and the huge fines they received from the European Commission. Someone out there is trying to do a good job, sending the business in the right direction. But I agree with you. No, that's number 3. We absolutely need to have these companies on the good side of society. We need to stop to thinking that this these companies are simply providing a service, wash their hands, I have no responsibility. No, you are, say, a big agent in our world, and therefore you need to be at the table as a good citizen. To do that, we need to create the conditions. The conditions are socio-political. So it's a different game. It's not, as you said, no, with the car industry regulating and everything will be fine, but it's more like, okay, how we can co-opt these powerful agents to do the right thing. The co-opting is a 21st century new design, which we haven't seen before.
Interesting. If you had to give an advice to a young student that may be thinking of studying philosophy, or he is in the first year of philosophy, what would it be, the advice?
Maybe a couple of advices here, maybe one complicated advice. Make sure you do not engage with philosophers' problems. Make sure that the problems you're engaging with are philosophical problems. The philosophy problems nobody cares anything about. Is the guy who walking alone, looking at the sky, bumping into the tree. It's when philosophy talks about itself, to itself, and is completely self-referential. Unfortunately, in a very flexible space of problems, that's very easy to do. You start talking about yourself and that. So stay away from philosophers talking about philosophers and the history of philosophy, about the history of philosophy, and start engaging with real philosophical issues which you may not find in a textbook. Just read a newspaper, walk in the real street with the real people, and start asking, what is pressing today? Because some of the classic philosophers are with us, they just get reinterpreted. Now, what's the meaning of life in the information society? What's an object, an entity, something when we have digital objects? What's agency when you have artificial intelligence? What's politics when direct voting is possible through the digital mechanism? All these problems that we have had forever, that gets reinterpreted and reshaped again and again in history. Make sure you focus on those, and then you will be a good philosopher that society will look forward to listening to.
Luciano, thank you very much for this beautiful interview. I had a really good time. I hope that you also had a good time, and it was a great pleasure to have you here.
It was a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me over.